In a modest Portland home, a 90-year-old retired librarian was about to discover the true cost of unconditional love. What started as preparing for her milestone birthday took a shocking turn when she came face to face with complete family silence. Ava Smith wasn't your typical grandmother. For decades, she had been her family's emotional cornerstone, known for endless sacrifices and unwavering devotion. When she encountered her forgotten 90th birthday, she had no idea she was walking into a life-altering awakening. Ava's quiet decision to change her will would lead to the most empowering act of her life. What began as hopeful anticipation would become calculated justice. Her family would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Ava Smith's modest Portland home, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor she'd polished to a warm gleam the evening before. At 90, her movements carried the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world with deliberate grace. Each step from her bedroom to the kitchen held purpose, each gesture economical yet filled with quiet anticipation. Today was different. Today marked 9 decades of life, and Ava felt the weight of that milestone settling around her shoulders like a familiar shawl. She had awakened before dawn, not from restlessness but from the kind of excited energy she hadn't felt in years. Her children, Margaret, David, Patricia, and Michael, surely wouldn't forget such an important day. At least, she hoped they wouldn't. The kitchen smelled of the cinnamon rolls she'd baked at 5 in the morning, their golden surfaces still warm in the covered basket she'd placed on the counter. Her best china, the delicate blue and white set that had been her grandmother's, sat arranged on the dining room table, each piece positioned with the care of someone who understood that presentation mattered. Fresh roses from her garden, their petals still heavy with morning dew, filled the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift 47 years ago. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Ava's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup as she settled into the chair by the window, the same chair where she'd spent countless mornings watching the neighborhood wake up. The couple next door, the Johnsons, had already left for work, their garage door closing with its familiar mechanical groan. Across the street, Mrs. Chen was tending to her prized tomatoes, her movements efficient and purposeful. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 9. The phone remained silent on its cradle, and Ava found herself glancing at it with increasing frequency. Perhaps they were planning something. Perhaps they wanted to surprise her. The thought brought a small smile to her lips, and she busied herself with unnecessary tasks, reorganizing the spice cabinet, wiping down already clean counters, adjusting the roses in their vase. By 10:30, the silence had begun to feel oppressive. Ava picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over the numbers. She could call Margaret at her law firm just to chat. Nothing obvious, nothing that would sound like begging for attention. Margaret Smith Chen's office, came the crisp voice of her daughter's assistant. Hello, this is Ava Smith. I was hoping to speak with my daughter. I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, but Ms. Chen is in depositions all morning. May I take a message? Ava's throat tightened. No message. It's nothing urgent. The line went dead, and Ava stared at the phone for a long moment. Margaret was busy. That was nothing new. Her eldest daughter had built an empire on being busy, on being indispensable to clients who paid her hundreds of dollars an hour. Ava had been proud of that success, even as she'd watched it consume the warm, curious girl who used to spend hours in the library where Ava worked, reading everything she could get her hands on. She tried David next, though she knew better than to expect him to be awake before noon. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, his voice lazy and charming even in recorded form. You've reached David Smith. I'm probably creating something amazing, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when inspiration strikes. The beep sounded, and Ava found herself speechless. What could she say? Hello, David, it's your mother. I'm 90 today, and I was hoping you might remember? The words felt too pathetic to speak aloud. David, it's Mom. Just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can. Patricia's phone went straight to voicemail, a harried recording interrupted by what sounded like children arguing in the background. Michael's number in Seattle rang and rang before an automated message informed her that the subscriber was not available. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the dining room table where the unused china waited. Ava walked past it, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The cinnamon rolls had grown cold, their sweet aroma replaced by the stale scent of disappointment. She found herself in the living room, standing before the bookshelf that held decades of photo albums. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the one labeled 1980s, the decade when her children had been teenagers, when the house had been full of noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of a single mother raising 4 strong-willed kids. The photographs told a story she'd almost forgotten. There was Margaret at her high school graduation, beaming with pride as she clutched her valedictorian medal. David at 15, paint splattered and grinning as he showed off his first real canvas. Patricia in her wedding dress, radiant and young and full of dreams. Michael holding his business degree, serious and determined even then. In every photo, Ava noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. She was always in the background, always supporting, always present, but never the focus. Even at her own surprise 50th birthday party, she was caught mid-gesture, serving cake to others while her own slice sat untouched on the counter. The sound of a key in the front door made her look up, hope fluttering in her chest. But it wasn't one of her children. It was Rosa Martinez, her healthcare aide, arriving for her twice-weekly visit. Rosa's warm brown eyes took in the scene. The set table, the wilted roses, the photo albums scattered across the coffee table. "Señora Ava," Rosa said softly, her accent wrapping around the words like a gentle embrace. "Today is your birthday, no?" The simple acknowledgement broke something loose inside Ava's chest. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." Rosa's face creased with concern and then determination. "Wait here. I'll be right back." She disappeared through the front door, leaving Ava alone with her photographs and her silence. When Rosa returned 10 minutes later, she carried a small cake. Nothing fancy, just a simple yellow cake with white frosting and 90 candles somehow squeezed onto its surface. "I made this for you yesterday," Rosa said, setting the cake on the coffee table. "My abuela always said that birthdays should be celebrated, especially the important ones." 90 years. That's a whole lifetime of stories, see? Ava's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all day. "Rosa, you didn't have to." "Of course I did. You are important, Señora Ava. You matter." They sat together on the couch, the cake between them, and for the first time all day, Ava felt truly seen. Rosa lit the candles with matches from the kitchen, and as the tiny flames danced in the dimming light, she began to sing "Happy Birthday" in Spanish, her voice clear and strong and full of genuine affection. When the song ended, Rosa looked at her expectantly. "Make a wish, señora." Ava closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she made a wish that surprised her with its clarity and steel. "I wish to matter. I wish to be seen. I wish to stop being invisible." She blew out the candles, and in the sudden darkness, she felt something shift inside her chest. The disappointment was still there, sharp and painful, but alongside it grew something else, a quiet determination that felt foreign and powerful. As they shared the cake, Rosa chatting about her daughter's upcoming school play and her mother's arthritis, Ava found herself studying the woman who had remembered when her own family had forgotten. Rosa worked 2 jobs, sent money to relatives in Mexico, and still found time to bake a cake for an old woman who wasn't even her family. When Rosa finally left, kissing Ava's cheek and promising to see her on Thursday, Ava sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the detritus of her forgotten day. The china still waited on the dining room table, the cinnamon rolls still sat untouched in their basket, and the roses had begun to drop their petals onto the polished wood. But something had changed. As Ava looked around her empty house, she didn't feel the same crushing loneliness she'd felt that morning. Instead, she felt the first stirrings of something that might have been anger, or perhaps simply a long-overdue awakening to her own worth. She picked up one of the photo albums, flipping through pages of memories, where she was always giving, always supporting, always present for others. The woman in those photographs looked happy, fulfilled even. But Ava couldn't remember the last time someone had been present for her in the same way. The phone remained silent as evening settled over Portland. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement of 9 decades of life from the people she had spent those decades nurturing and supporting. Ava closed the photo album and set it carefully on the side table. Tomorrow, she decided, she would do something she'd never done before. Tomorrow, she would start thinking about what she wanted, what she deserved, and what she was going to do about it. The birthday candles had burned down to nothing, but their message lingered in the air like smoke. It was time for Ava Smith to stop being invisible. The morning after her forgotten birthday, Ava woke with an unfamiliar heaviness in her chest. Not the weight of disappointment, but something sharper, more focused. She'd spent the night turning Rosa's words over in her mind. "You are important, Senora Ava. You matter." The simple declaration had lodged itself somewhere deep, like a seed finding purchase in long dormant soil. She made her coffee with the same careful ritual as always, but her movements carried a different quality now. Where yesterday she'd moved with hopeful anticipation, today she moved with quiet observation. The unused china still sat on the dining room table, a monument to expectations that had crumbled like day-old pastry. Through the kitchen window, she could see her neighbor Jim Patterson already at work in his garden, his weathered hands gentle as he tended to the late-blooming roses that bordered their shared fence. Jim had been her neighbor for 15 years, though they'd only begun talking regularly after his wife Helen passed 2 years ago. Their conversations had evolved from polite greetings to something approaching friendship, the kind built on shared understanding of loss and the particular loneliness that comes with outliving most of your contemporaries. Ava found herself drawn to the window, watching as Jim carefully pruned dead blooms with the patience of someone who understood that gardens, like people, needed tending to flourish. There was something comforting about his methodical approach, the way he seemed to know exactly which branches to cut and which to nurture. "Morning, Ava," Jim called out, noticing her silhouette in the window. His voice carried the warm gravitas of someone who'd spent decades teaching high school English, each word chosen with care. Beautiful morning for October. She stepped outside, her cardigan pulled tight against the crisp air. "It is," she agreed, though she found herself studying his face rather than the sky. Jim Patterson had the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything, a trait that had probably served him well in the classroom, and served him even better now, in the careful navigation of late-life friendship. "How was your birthday yesterday?" he asked, pausing in his work to give her his full attention. The question shouldn't have surprised her. Jim was the kind of person who remembered details, who filed away the small pieces of information that others forgot. But somehow, his simple acknowledgement hit her with unexpected force. "Quiet," she said, then found herself adding, "very quiet." Jim set down his pruning shears and moved closer to the fence that separated their properties. "Family busy?" The word busy hung between them like a lifeline she could either grab or let drift away. She could make excuses, spin the familiar story of successful children with demanding lives. She could preserve the fiction that had sustained her for so long. Instead, she heard herself saying, "They forgot." Jim's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle straightening that spoke of attention rather than judgment. "All of them?" "All of them." The words felt both liberating and terrifying. 90 years, and not one of them remembered. Jim was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to his hands, then back again. "When Helen was dying," he said finally, "she made me promise something. She said I shouldn't let people take my presence for granted just because I was getting older. She said the world has a way of making elderly people invisible, but we don't have to accept that invisibility." Ava felt something stir in her chest, recognition, perhaps, or simply the relief of being understood. "What did you do?" "I started paying attention to who actually showed up," Jim said simply. "Not who said they cared, but who proved it. Not who made promises, but who kept them. It was illuminating." The word hung in the air between them, rich with implication. Ava found herself thinking about Rosa's homemade cake, about the way her healthcare aide had noticed the untouched china and wilted roses without needing explanation. Then she thought about her phone, silent all day except for the automated reminder from her dentist's office. "I keep telling myself they're busy," Ava said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Important careers, young families, responsibilities. But yesterday, sitting in that empty house, I started wondering when I stopped being one of their responsibilities." Jim nodded slowly. "Helen used to say that love isn't a feeling you have. It's a choice you make, every day, in small ways. The way you show up, the way you remember, the way you prioritize. And if they're not choosing it, then maybe it's time to choose differently yourself." The suggestion settled between them like a bridge she hadn't known she needed to cross. For 70 years, Ava had been the one who remembered birthdays, who showed up for graduations and divorces and crises. She had been the constant, the given, the woman who would always be there because she always had been. "I've been thinking about my will," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "About what I'm leaving behind, and who I'm leaving it to." Jim's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "That's practical thinking. Is it terrible of me to consider changing it? Terrible to want your legacy to reflect your values? To ensure your resources go to people who actually value you?" Jim shook his head. "Ava, you've spent 90 years taking care of other people. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself." The sound of a car door slamming interrupted their conversation. Rosa appeared around the corner of the house, her arms full of grocery bags, and her face bright with the kind of energy that seemed to follow her everywhere. "Señora Ava," Rosa called out, shifting the bags to wave. "Good morning, and good morning, Mr. Patterson." Jim smiled and waved back. "Morning, Rosa. How's that daughter of yours?" "Growing too fast," Rosa laughed, setting down the bags to fish keys from her pocket. "She's already talking about college, and she's only 14. I told her she gets that ambition from her abuela. My mother always said education was the one thing no one could take away from you." Ava watched the easy exchange, noting how Jim remembered to ask about Rosa's daughter, how Rosa's face lit up when she talked about her family. There was something authentic in their interaction, a genuine interest that felt different from the perfunctory check-ins she received from her own children. "Rosa," Ava said as the younger woman approached, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, señora." "Your family in Mexico, do they forget your birthday?" Rosa's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Never. Even when money is tight, even when the phones don't work, someone always finds a way to remember. My madre says forgetting someone's birthday is like forgetting they exist." The words hit Ava like a physical blow. Forgetting they exist. Is that what had happened to her? Had she become so much a part of the landscape of her children's lives that they no longer saw her as a person worthy of celebration? "But," Rosa continued, her voice gentler now, "I think sometimes families here, they get so busy with their own lives that they forget to look up. They forget to see the people who have always been there. It doesn't mean they don't love you, señora. It just means they need to remember how to show it." Jim cleared his throat softly. "The question is, what do you do when they don't remember?" Rosa looked between them, her dark eyes thoughtful. "In my culture we have a saying, el amor se demuestra, no se declara. Love is demonstrated, not declared. If someone truly loves you, you don't have to wonder about it. You know it because you feel it in their actions." Ava felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "And if you don't feel it, then maybe it's time to surround yourself with people who know how to love properly," Rosa said simply. "Life is too short to spend it feeling invisible." The three of them stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling around them like autumn leaves. Ava found herself thinking about the business card she'd noticed in her junk drawer months ago. Sarah Kim, estate planning attorney. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She'd kept it for reasons she couldn't quite articulate at the time, but now she wondered if some part of her had been preparing for this moment. "Rosa," she said finally, "after we finish this morning, would you mind helping me find a phone number?" "Of course, señora. Anyone special? Ava glanced at Jim, who nodded encouragingly. A lawyer, she said, the word feeling both foreign and powerful on her tongue. I think it's time I made some changes. As they walked toward the house, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of forward momentum, of possibility. Behind them, Jim returned to his gardening, but she could feel his supportive presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across her garden. Soon, Rosa would help her make the call that would change everything. But for now, Ava allowed herself to simply feel the weight of her own decision, the power of finally choosing herself. The phone would ring in Sarah Kim's office within the hour, and Ava Smith would take the first step toward reclaiming her own worth. The woman who had spent 90 years being invisible was about to discover just how much power she'd been hiding all along. The elevator in the downtown Portland office building moved with the kind of mechanical precision that reminded Ava of her own careful routines, steady, reliable, but somehow hollow. She watched the numbers climb. 3rd floor, 4th, 5th. Each ascending digit brought her closer to a conversation that would either validate her newfound resolve or expose it as the foolish fantasy of a disappointed old woman. Sarah Kim's office occupied the 7th floor of a building that managed to feel both professional and welcoming. The waiting area featured warm wood paneling and comfortable chairs that didn't swallow Ava's small frame, though she found herself perched on the edge of her seat anyway, her purse clutched in both hands like an anchor. Mrs. Smith? A woman emerged from the inner office, her hand extended in greeting. Sarah Kim looked younger than Ava had expected. Perhaps 45. With intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of purposeful energy that reminded Ava of Margaret in her better moments. I'm Sarah Kim. Thank you for coming in. The office itself surprised Ava with its warmth. Where she'd expected sterile professionalism, she found family photographs on the desk, a small jade plant by the window, and artwork that looked like it might have been created by children. Sarah noticed her attention. My daughter's masterpieces, Sarah said with a smile, settling behind her desk. She's convinced I need more color in my work life. I'm beginning to think she's right. Ava found herself relaxing slightly. How old is she? 8 going on 30. She's already planning to be a lawyer like her mom, though she insists she'll specialize in, quote, helping animals get justice. Sarah's expression grew more serious as she opened a folder. Now, you mentioned on the phone that you're interested in reviewing your estate planning. Can you tell me a bit about your current situation? The question should have been simple. Ava had rehearsed variations of this conversation during the sleepless hours since Rosa had helped her make the appointment. But sitting here, faced with the reality of what she was contemplating, the words felt heavier than expected. I'm 90 years old, she began, then stopped, realizing how that sounded. I mean, I have 4 children, and I've been thinking about my will. About whether it reflects who I actually am now. Sarah's pen remained poised over her notepad, but she didn't write anything. That's a very thoughtful way to approach estate planning. Many people think of wills as static documents, but they should evolve as we do. What's prompted this reflection? Ava found herself studying Sarah's face, looking for signs of judgment or impatience. She saw only professional attention mixed with something that might have been genuine curiosity. My family forgot my birthday, she said simply. My 90th birthday. All of them. Sarah set down her pen entirely. I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly painful. The acknowledgement, direct, uncomplicated, without excuses or explanations, hit Ava with unexpected force. It was. But it also made me realize something I'd been avoiding for a long time. I've spent 70 years being the person who remembers everyone else's important moments, who shows up for every crisis, who gives and gives until giving becomes invisible. And I'm tired of being invisible. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your current will. When was it last updated? 5 years ago, after I sold the house Robert and I raised the children in. Everything is divided equally among the 4 of them. Margaret, David, Patricia, and Michael. Standard stuff, I suppose. The house where I live now, my savings, some family heirlooms. Nothing complicated. And your relationship with each of them? Ava hesitated, then decided on honesty. Margaret is a lawyer, corporate law, very successful, very busy. She loves me, I think, but she shows it by sending money when I mention needing something. David is troubled. Addiction issues, financial problems. I've been bailing him out for 20 years. Patricia is overwhelmed with her own family, 3 teenagers. She means well, but she's drowning in her own life. Michael moved to Seattle years ago. He calls once a month, but it's duty, not connection. Sarah nodded, making notes now. And there are others in your life who provide support? Rosa, my healthcare aide, she's become more than that, really. She's become family in a way my actual family isn't. And my neighbor Jim. We've grown close since his wife died. Ava paused, thinking of Tyler's unexpected visit. And my grandson, Tyler, David's son. He's different from the others. He actually sees me. Mrs. Smith, can I ask you something personal? Sarah's voice carried a gentleness that made Ava nod. What do you want your legacy to reflect? Not what you think you should want, but what you actually want. The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implication. Ava found herself thinking about the photo albums scattered across her coffee table, about all those images where she existed in the margins of other people's important moments. I want it to reflect the truth, she said finally. I want the people who actually love me, not just the idea of me, but me, to be taken care of. I want Rosa to be able to send her daughter to college without working 3 jobs. I want Jim to know that our friendship mattered to me. I want Tyler to understand that his visits meant everything. And your other children? Ava's throat tightened. I want them to understand that love is a choice you make every day, not a feeling you claim to have. I want them to realize that being taken for granted has consequences. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her pen moving across the notepad in careful strokes. Mrs. Smith, I need to be clear about something. What you're describing, restructuring your will to reflect your actual relationships rather than traditional family expectations, it's completely legal and entirely within your rights. But it may have significant emotional consequences for your family. More significant than feeling forgotten and invisible for the rest of my life? Sarah's expression softened. My grandmother went through something similar. She was the matriarch of a large Korean family, and she spent her entire life serving others. When she was diagnosed with cancer, she discovered that most of her children were too busy to visit regularly. But her next-door neighbor, an elderly widow, came every day, made her soup, read to her, just sat with her when she was afraid. What did she do? She left that neighbor half her estate. The family was furious, but my grandmother's will included a letter explaining her decision. She wrote that she wanted her legacy to reward the kind of love she'd always tried to give: present, consistent, and unconditional. Ava felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Did they understand? Eventually. Not all of them, but some. My mother was one of the ones who didn't understand at first, but after my grandmother died, she started visiting elderly neighbors, bringing them meals, checking on them. She said she didn't want anyone else to feel the way her mother had felt. The story settled between them like a bridge spanning the gap between legal advice and human understanding. Ava found herself thinking about Margaret's assistant, about David's voicemail, about the silence that had filled her house on what should have been a celebration. What would you need from me to make these changes? Ava asked. Sarah consulted her notes. I'd need you to be very specific about your intentions. We'd want to structure this in a way that minimizes the potential for legal challenges, while clearly expressing your wishes. We'd also want to consider whether you'd like to include explanatory letters to your family members. Letters? Personal explanations of your decisions. They're not legally required, but they can provide context and closure. Sometimes they help families understand that these decisions come from love, not anger. Ava imagined sitting down to write letters to her children, trying to explain 90 years of accumulated disappointment and love in a way that might bridge the gap between her expectations and their reality. The thought was both terrifying and oddly liberating. How long would this take? To draft new documents? A few weeks, depending on the complexity. But Mrs. Smith, I'd encourage you to take some time to think about this. Make sure you're making these decisions from a place of clarity rather than immediate pain. I've been thinking about this for longer than I realized, Ava said. Yesterday just brought it into focus. Sarah smiled. Then let's schedule a follow-up appointment. I'll draft some preliminary documents based on what you've told me today, and we can review them together. Make sure everything reflects your true intentions. As Ava rode the elevator down to the lobby, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of agency, of control over her own narrative. For the first time in decades, she was making a decision based on what she wanted, rather than what others expected. The afternoon sun felt warmer as she emerged onto the busy Portland street. Around her, people moved with purpose, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own moments of awakening. Ava Smith, at 90, was finally writing her own ending. The 2 weeks following Ava's meeting with Sarah Kim transformed her from participant to observer in her own life. Where once she had moved through her days with the automatic rhythms of routine, now she found herself watching, cataloging, measuring the weight of every interaction with the precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. She started keeping a small notebook. Nothing obvious, just a slim journal tucked into her purse where she could jot down observations. The entries began simply. Tuesday, 10 a.m. called Margaret's office. In meetings all day. But as the days passed, the notes became more detailed, more revealing. Margaret mentioned needing to work late again. Didn't ask how I'm doing. Conversation lasted 4 minutes. The notebook became her companion, a tangible record of patterns she'd spent years ignoring. Each entry was a small piece of evidence in a case she was building against her own self-deception. Thursday brought David's predictable call, though it came later than usual, nearly 3 in the afternoon. Ava had been expecting it. His calls always followed a pattern, coinciding with rent due dates or some new crisis that required immediate maternal intervention. "Mom, thank God you're home." David's voice carried that familiar blend of charm and desperation that had once made her heart race with protective instincts. Now she listened with different ears, noting the way he launched into his problems without asking about her life. "I'm in a bit of a situation," he continued, his words tumbling over each other with practiced urgency. "The gallery that was supposed to show my work, they're being bought out, and the new owners want to clear everything out. I need to get my pieces into storage, but the storage place wants 3 months up front, and I'm just a little short right now." Ava found herself counting the seconds of silence that followed, the space where he waited for her to offer the solution he'd already decided she would provide. In the past, she would have filled that silence immediately, her maternal instincts overriding any practical concerns. "How much do you need?" she asked, though the question felt different now, less like automatic acquiescence and more like gathering information. "Just 1,500. I know it sounds like a lot, but this could be the break I've been waiting for. If I can just get through this rough patch." "David," Ava interrupted gently, "how many rough patches have there been?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how many times have I helped you through a rough patch? How many times have you told me this was the break you were waiting for?" She could hear him shifting, the sound of movement that suggested discomfort. "Mom, I know I've asked for help before, but this is different. This is about my career, my future. I thought you believed in my art." There it was. The guilt, applied with the skill of someone who had learned exactly which buttons to push. Ava felt the familiar tug of maternal obligation, the voice that had driven her decisions for decades, whispering that good mothers supported their children unconditionally. But another voice, newer and stronger, reminded her of Sarah Kim's words, "Love is demonstrated, not declared." "I do believe in your art, David, but I'm starting to wonder if my help has become an enablement that's preventing you from standing on your own." The silence stretched longer this time, and when David spoke again, his voice carried a harder edge. "So you're saying no? Your own son is asking for help and you're saying no?" "I'm saying that I need to think about it." "Think about it? Mom, I need an answer by tomorrow. The storage place won't hold the space." Ava closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his expectation, the decades of conditioning that screamed at her to solve his problem, Then you'll need to find another solution. The phone went dead. David had hung up without saying goodbye, without asking how she was doing, without any acknowledgement that she might have her own concerns or feelings. Ava stared at the receiver, then carefully wrote in her notebook. David called for money. When I hesitated, he hung up. Total conversation time, 11 minutes. Time spent asking about my life, 0. Friday brought a brief call from Michael in Seattle, his voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone checking an item off a to-do list. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing, he said, though Ava could hear the sound of typing in the background. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are things with the business? Busy season, you know how it is. Hey, I might not be able to make it down for Thanksgiving this year. The restaurant industry doesn't really slow down for holidays. Ava felt a familiar stab of disappointment, but she found herself responding differently than she might have in the past. That's too bad. I was hoping to see you. Yeah, well, maybe Christmas. We'll see how things go. The conversation lasted 6 minutes, and Ava dutifully recorded it, noting that Michael had asked how she was doing, but hadn't waited for a meaningful answer, had mentioned his own busy schedule 3 times, and had ended with vague promises he was unlikely to keep. Saturday brought an unexpected visit from Patricia, though it quickly became clear that desperation rather than affection had driven the trip across town. Patricia arrived with dark circles under her eyes and the frazzled energy of someone barely keeping her head above water. Mom, I hate to ask, but I'm in such a bind, she said, barely pausing to kiss Ava's cheek before launching into her crisis. Kevin's working a double shift, and I have to take Emma to her tournament, but the boys have conflicting schedules and I just can't be 3 places at once. What do you need from me? Ava asked, though she already knew the answer. Could you possibly take the boys for the afternoon, just until Kevin gets home around 6? I know it's last minute, but you're the only one I can count on. Ava looked at her youngest daughter, noting the way Patricia's eyes darted around the room rather than making direct contact, the way she'd positioned herself near the door as if ready to flee the moment she had an answer. Patricia, when was the last time you visited me just to spend time together? The question clearly caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you came here without needing something? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your schedule or your problems? Patricia's face flushed. Mom, I'm barely keeping my head above water. Between work and the kids and Kevin's schedule, I don't have time for social visits. I thought you understood that. I understand that you're overwhelmed. But I wonder if you understand that I'm a person, not just a solution to your scheduling problems. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unfamiliar. Patricia stared at her mother as if seeing her for the first time, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Of course I know you're a person, Patricia said finally. Mom, where is this coming from? From 90 years of being taken for granted. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching hurt. That's not fair. I've always appreciated everything you've done for us. Have you? When was the last time you told me that? When was the last time you asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answer? Patricia looked stricken, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know, but you never seemed to need anything. You've always been so strong, so capable. I just assumed. You assumed I didn't need the same consideration you'd want from your own children? The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken resentments and long-ignored needs. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice smaller than before. I can find someone else to watch the boys. No, Ava said gently. I'll watch them. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. I'm not an endless resource. I'm a person who has feelings and needs and limits, and I need my family to remember that. Patricia nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I didn't realize. I should have realized. After Patricia left with promises to do better, Ava sat in her quiet house and wrote in her notebook. Patricia visited, needed babysitting. When confronted about taking me for granted, she seemed genuinely surprised, maybe capable of change. Sunday brought the week's most surprising visitor. Tyler appeared at her door with a bouquet of sunflowers and a genuine smile that reminded Ava of David at his best. Creative, thoughtful, unburdened by the weight of expectations. "Hey, Grandma," he said, pulling her into a hug that felt real rather than obligatory. "I brought you these because they reminded me of you, bright and strong and impossible to ignore." Ava felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Tyler, what a lovely surprise. I was in the neighborhood and realized I haven't seen you in weeks. That's not acceptable." He settled onto her couch with the easy comfort of someone who belonged. "Tell me everything. How are you? How's the house? How's that neighbor of yours? Jim?" For the first time in weeks, Ava found herself in a conversation that felt reciprocal, where her thoughts and feelings were sought rather than assumed. Tyler listened when she spoke, asked follow-up questions, shared his own life in return. "I'm working on this photography project," he said, pulling out his phone to show her images. "It's about overlooked beauty, things that are always there but that people stop seeing. Like this old tree in Powell Park that everyone walks past, or the way morning light hits the windows of that apartment building on Hawthorne." Ava studied the photographs, noting the way Tyler had captured moments of quiet dignity in forgotten places. "They're beautiful, Tyler. You have a real gift." "Thanks. I've been thinking about asking if I could photograph you sometime. You have the most interesting face. So much history, so much character." The request surprised her. Most people don't want to photograph 90-year-old faces. "Most people don't know how to see," Tyler said simply. "But I see you, Grandma. I see how strong you are, how much you've given, how much you matter." As Tyler left 2 hours later, Ava added a different kind of entry to her notebook. "Tyler visited, brought flowers, talked for 2 hours, asked about my life, shared his own, wants to photograph me, sees me." The week's observations had crystallized something important. Some family members took her for granted because they'd never been asked to do otherwise. Others, like David, saw her primarily as a resource to be tapped when needed. But Tyler saw her as a person worthy of attention, respect, and love. The evidence was clear. Now she needed to decide what to do with it. Sarah Kim's office felt different during Ava's second visit. The autumn light streaming through the windows seemed sharper, more decisive, matching the clarity that had settled over Ava's thoughts during her weeks of observation. She carried her small notebook like a talisman, its pages filled with the careful documentation of her family's patterns. "You look resolved," Sarah observed as Ava settled into the familiar chair across from her desk. "I am." Ava opened her notebook, its entries now forming a map of relationships she could no longer ignore. "I've been watching, really watching, how my family treats me." The results were illuminating. Sarah waited, her pen poised but patient. "David hung up on me when I didn't immediately agree to give him money. Michael called for 6 minutes and spent most of it talking about his own schedule. Patricia came over needing babysitting and seemed genuinely shocked when I suggested she might visit just to spend time with me." Ava's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "But Tyler brought me flowers and spent 2 hours actually talking with me, not at me. And that's informed your decision?" "It's confirmed what I already knew but was afraid to admit." Ava closed the notebook. "I want to restructure everything. Rosa gets 40% of my estate. She's been more of a daughter to me than my own daughters. Jim gets 20%. He's shown me what real companionship looks like. Tyler gets 20% because he's the only family member who sees me as a person worth knowing." Sarah made careful notes. "And your other children?" "Patricia gets 10%, conditional on her making genuine efforts to maintain a relationship with me. She seemed capable of change when I confronted her." Ava's expression hardened slightly. "Margaret and Michael get 5% each. They can afford their own lives. David gets nothing. Mrs. Smith completely disinheriting a child can invite legal challenges. Then let him challenge it. I have 70 years of documentation showing how I've supported him, and weeks of recent evidence showing how little I matter to him." Ava's voice carried a steel that surprised even her. "I want the remaining 10% to go to literacy programs at the library where I worked. They'll appreciate it more than David ever would." Sarah studied her client's face, seeing the transformation from uncertain widow to determined woman. I'll need everything documented meticulously. We'll create a comprehensive record of your reasoning. I also want to write letters. To each of them. They deserve to understand why. That's wise. Often the letters provide more healing than the legal documents themselves. As they worked through the details, Ava felt pieces of her life rearranging themselves into something that finally made sense. Rose's dedication would be rewarded. Jim's friendship would be honored. Tyler's genuine love would be acknowledged. And her other children would learn that love required more than blood relation. It required showing up. When can this be finalized? Ava asked. 2 weeks. I'll draft everything, and we'll review it together. Sarah paused. Mrs. Smith, how do you feel about this decision? For the first time in months, Ava smiled with genuine contentment. I feel like I'm finally telling the truth. The signed will sat in Ava's bedroom drawer like a loaded weapon, its presence both empowering and unsettling. 3 weeks had passed since she'd placed the manila envelope beneath her winter sweaters, and the weight of her secret had begun to color every interaction with her family. She found herself analyzing conversations through a new lens, not just observing their behavior, but knowing she'd already acted on those observations in ways they couldn't imagine. The knowledge created an odd sensation of living in 2 worlds simultaneously. In one world, she was still the accommodating matriarch, the reliable constant her family could count on. In the other, she was a woman who had quietly redistributed her legacy to reflect her actual relationships rather than societal expectations. David's latest crisis call tested her resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. He'd waited 3 weeks to contact her after their uncomfortable conversation, and when he finally called, his voice carried the particular blend of desperation and entitlement that always preceded his biggest asks. Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious, he said, his words rushing together in a way that suggested he'd rehearsed this conversation. I've been thinking about what you said last time, about standing on my own, and you were right. But I've got one more situation, and if you can help me this time, I promise it'll be the last. Ava listened to his elaborate explanation, gambling debts that had spiraled beyond his control, men who weren't patient about repayment, consequences that sounded both dramatic and vague. The old Ava would have been reaching for her checkbook before he finished speaking, her maternal instincts overriding any practical concerns. How much, David? 12,000. I know it's a lot, but Mom, these aren't the kind of people you can negotiate with. And I've learned my lesson, I swear. This is rock bottom for me. Ava found herself thinking about the will in her drawer, about the decision she'd already made to leave him nothing. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was asking for money from an inheritance that no longer existed, at least not for him. David, I can't help you this time. The silence stretched longer than usual. When he spoke again, his voice carried a coldness she'd never heard before. Can't or won't? Does it matter? It matters to me. I'm your son, Mom. Your flesh and blood. If you can't help family, what's the point of having money at all? The words hit her with unexpected force. Not because they hurt, but because they revealed the fundamental difference in how they viewed their relationship. For David, she wasn't a person with her own needs and limits. She was a resource to be accessed when convenient. The point of having money, she said carefully, is to be able to choose how it's used. And I'm choosing not to enable your gambling addiction anymore. Enable? His voice rose sharply. I'm trying to get out of a dangerous situation, and you're calling it enabling? I'm calling it what it is. David, I've given you money dozens of times over the years. Has it ever actually solved your problems, or just postponed them? The question hung in the air, and Ava could almost hear him calculating his response. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a threat she'd never heard before. You know, Mom, I've been talking to a lawyer about inheritance law, about what happens when family members try to cut their children out of wills. Just in case you're thinking about punishing me for being honest about my problems. The threat should have frightened her. Instead, it confirmed every decision she'd made. Is that what you think this is about? Punishment? I think it's about an old woman who's forgotten what family means. After he hung up, Ava sat in her kitchen, staring at the phone. The conversation had peeled back layers of pretense she hadn't even realized existed. David wasn't just asking for money. He was making demands based on an assumed inheritance, threatening legal action against decisions he didn't even know she'd made. She thought about the letters she'd written to each of her children, sealed and waiting in Sarah Kim's office. David's letter had been the hardest to write, filled with decades of love and disappointment in equal measure. Now she wondered if he'd even read it, or if he'd simply hand it to whatever lawyer he'd consulted. The afternoon brought Maggie's promised visit, her first in 6 months. Ava's eldest daughter arrived with the purposeful energy of someone checking an obligation off her list, her expensive suit and distracted manner marking her as someone whose time was precisely allocated. "I can only stay about an hour," Maggie announced, settling onto the couch with her phone still in hand. "I have a conference call with Tokyo at 4. Ava watched her daughter's eyes dart between the room and her phone screen, noting how even this brief visit felt rushed and conditional. "How are things at the firm?" "Busy. We're closing a major acquisition and I'm leading the team. It's good for my partnership track, but the hours are insane." Maggie looked up briefly. "You look good, Mom. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine. Getting older, but fine." "Good. I worry about you living alone, but you seem to manage well." Maggie's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it automatically. "Sorry, I need to take this." 2 minutes. She stepped into the kitchen for a conversation that stretched to 15 minutes, leaving Ava alone with her thoughts. When Maggie returned, she seemed more distracted than before. "Where were we? Oh, right. I've been thinking we should talk about your arrangements. Your will, your healthcare directives, that sort of thing. I know it's not pleasant to think about, but as your eldest, I should probably know where things stand." The assumption in her voice, that she would naturally be the one to handle Ava's affairs, struck Ava as both presumptuous and telling. "I have everything taken care of, sweetheart." "Are you sure? Because I could review your documents, make sure everything's structured properly." "Tax implications can be tricky." "I'm sure." Maggie's phone rang again, and she answered it without apology. "I have to go," she said, gathering her things. "But let's definitely continue this conversation soon. I want to make sure you're protected." As Maggie left, Ava realized that her daughter's concern wasn't about her well-being. It was about ensuring her inheritance was properly managed. The knowledge sat heavily in her chest, another confirmation that her decisions had been not just justified, but necessary. The morning started like any other, with Ava tending to her roses in the crisp November air. The blooms were late this year, their deep red petals defying the season's chill with the same stubborn persistence she'd come to recognize in herself. She was reaching for a particularly thorny stem when her foot caught on the garden hose, coiled near the fence. The fall happened in slow motion, the way emergencies always seem to unfold for the elderly, with enough time to recognize the inevitable but not enough to prevent it. Ava felt her ankle twist beneath her as she pitched forward, her hands instinctively reaching out to break her fall. The impact with the flagstone path sent a sharp pain shooting up her leg, and she lay there for a moment, assessing the damage with the practical calm that comes from 9 decades of minor disasters. "Ava!" Jim's voice carried over the fence, urgent and concerned. "Are you okay? I heard you fall." "I'm not sure," she called back, trying to push herself up and immediately regretting it. The pain in her ankle was sharp and insistent, and her left wrist throbbed where she'd landed on it. Within minutes, Jim was kneeling beside her, his hands gentle as he helped her assess her injuries. "Don't try to move yet," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd dealt with teenage athletes and their mishaps. "Let's figure out what's hurt." Rosa arrived 20 minutes later, having rushed over from her other client when Jim called. Her face was flushed with worry, and she immediately took charge with the efficiency of someone trained in emergency response. "Senora Ava, we need to get you to the hospital," she said, examining the rapidly swelling ankle. "This could be broken." The emergency room at Providence St. Vincent was a blur of fluorescent lights and medical efficiency. X-rays revealed a sprained ankle and a hairline fracture in her wrist, minor injuries that would heal, but significant enough to require overnight observation given her age. As Ava settled into the hospital bed, she found herself thinking about who to call, and more importantly, who would actually come. Rosa had insisted on staying until family arrived, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair with the determination of someone who wouldn't be moved. Jim had gone home to tend to both their gardens but promised to return in the evening. "You should call your children," Rosa said gently. "They'll want to know." Ava nodded, though she found herself curious about what wanting to know would actually look like in practice. She started with Margaret, reaching her assistant after being transferred twice. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Chen is in depositions all day," the assistant said crisply. "Can I take a message?" "This is her mother. I'm in the hospital." The tone changed immediately. "Oh my goodness, let me get her right away." Margaret's voice, when she finally came on the line, carried the brisk concern of someone managing a crisis. "Mom, what happened? Are you okay?" Ava explained the fall, the injuries, the overnight stay. Margaret listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for client emergencies. "I'm sending flowers," Margaret said, "and I'll call the hospital to make sure you're getting proper care. Do you need me to come down there?" The question hung in the air, and Ava realized Margaret was hoping for a no. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Rosa is here with me." "Good. Rosa's wonderful. I'll call you tomorrow to check in." The call ended, and Ava found herself staring at the phone. Margaret had done exactly what she'd expected: managed the crisis from a distance, delegated care to someone else, and promised follow-up that would likely be brief and dutiful. Michael's response was similar: concerned but distant, full of practical questions about her insurance and medical care, but no mention of traveling from Seattle. "I wish I could be there," he said, though his voice carried the relief of someone whose geographical distance excused personal absence. Patricia arrived 2 hours later, her anxiety filling the small hospital room like an electric current. She paced between the window and the bed, her hands fluttering nervously as she peppered Ava with questions. "Are you sure you're okay? Should I call another doctor? What about your medications? Are they interacting with anything they're giving you here?" Ava watched her youngest daughter's agitation, with a mixture of affection and exhaustion. Patricia's concern was genuine, but it was filtered through her own anxiety in a way that made Ava feel like she needed to manage her daughter's emotional state rather than focusing on her own recovery. "I'm fine, sweetheart, really. It's just a sprain and a small fracture." "But you're 90, Mom. Falls are serious at your age. What if you'd hit your head? What if you'd been alone for hours?" The questions spiraled, each one adding another layer of worry to an already stressful situation. After an hour of Patricia's anxious hovering, Ava found herself grateful when visiting hours ended. David's response came the next morning, not as a visit but as a phone call that began with perfunctory concern and quickly shifted to more familiar territory. "Mom, I'm glad you're okay," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone going through motions. "Listen, since you're in the hospital, I've been thinking about what we talked about my situation with those guys I owe money to. Being in the hospital makes you realize how fragile life is, right? How important it is to help family while you can." The audacity of using her injury as leverage for his financial problems took Ava's breath away. "David, I fell in my garden. I'm not on my deathbed." I know. But still, it makes you think. And if something had happened to you, and I was in trouble with these people, you'd want to know you'd helped me, right?" Ava closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decades of similar conversations. "David, we've already discussed this." "But Mom, you're my mother. If you can't help me, who can?" The question revealed everything about how David viewed their relationship. Not as a mutual bond built on love and respect, but as a one-way street where her role was to solve his problems, regardless of the cost to herself. "I need to rest now," she said, and hung up before he could respond. Tyler arrived that afternoon with a bouquet of sunflowers and a genuine smile that transformed the sterile hospital room. He pulled up the visitor's chair and settled in with the easy comfort of someone who belonged. "Grandma, you scared me," he said, taking her uninjured hand. "When Rosa called, I dropped everything." "Are you in pain?" "Not much. The medication helps." "Good. I brought you something." He pulled out a small photo album, its pages filled with the pictures he'd taken during his recent visits. "I thought you might like to see how I see you." The photographs were revelatory. Tyler had captured moments of quiet dignity, of laughter, of thoughtful contemplation. In his lens, Ava looked like what she was, a woman of substance, someone worth knowing and celebrating. "Tyler, these are beautiful." "You're beautiful, Grandma, inside and out. I wanted you to see that." He stayed for 3 hours, talking about his photography, asking about her life, sharing stories about his work at the coffee shop. When he finally left, Ava felt more rejuvenated than she had all day. Rosa returned that evening, bringing homemade soup and the kind of comfortable presence that made healing possible. Jim appeared shortly after, carrying a small potted plant from his garden. "For your windowsill," he said, placing it where the afternoon light would reach it. "Something to remind you that healing takes time, but it happens." As Ava settled in for her second night in the hospital, she found herself thinking about the past 24 hours. The crisis had revealed exactly what she'd suspected. Some family members managed care from a distance, others used it as leverage, and still others brought genuine comfort and presence. The flowers from Margaret sat on the bedside table, beautiful and expensive and somehow cold. David's voice echoed in her memory, calculating and manipulative. Patricia's anxiety had filled the room without actually helping. Michael's concern had been real but remote. But Rosa's soup warmed her stomach, Jim's plant brightened her spirits, and Tyler's photographs reminded her that she was seen, valued, and loved. The evidence was clear, and it confirmed every decision she'd made. The will in her drawer wasn't just a legal document. It was a statement of truth, a recognition of the difference between obligation and love, between showing up and being present. Tomorrow, she would go home to begin healing. But tonight, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by exactly the people who deserved her trust. The cast on Ava's wrist made simple tasks feel monumental, and the walking boot on her ankle transformed her usually graceful movements into a careful shuffle. 2 weeks had passed since her fall, and while her physical healing progressed steadily, the emotional revelations from the hospital had left her feeling both vindicated and oddly vulnerable. Tyler had taken to visiting every few days, ostensibly to help with household tasks, but really, Ava suspected, because he genuinely enjoyed her company. Today he'd arrived with groceries and an offer to help organize her home office, a cramped room that had become a repository for decades of important papers, photo albums, and the accumulated detritus of a long life. "Grandma, when was the last time you actually used this desk?" Tyler asked, surveying the chaos with the bemused expression of someone discovering an archaeological site. "Your grandfather used it more than I did," Ava admitted, settling into the chair by the window while Tyler began sorting through stacks of documents. "After he died, it just became a place to put things I didn't know what to do with." Tyler worked with the methodical patience of someone who understood that other people's organizational systems, however mysterious, had their own logic. He created piles, bills, tax documents, insurance papers, family photographs, chatting comfortably as he worked. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital," he said, pausing to examine a photograph of his grandfather, "about how families should show up for each other. It made me realize I haven't always been the grandson I could have been. Tyler, you're the only one who— No, let me finish." He set down the photograph and looked directly at her. "I know I'm different from the rest of the family. I know I visit more, that I actually listen when you talk. But I also know there have been times when I could have done more, been more present. Your fall scared me because I realized how much I'd regret it if something happened to you and I hadn't spent enough time really knowing you." Ava felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Tyler, you're 22 years old. You're not supposed to be worried about spending time with your grandmother." "Says who?" He smiled, returning to his sorting. "Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we've all bought into this idea that young people are supposed to be too busy for old people, that caring about your grandparents is somehow uncool or unnecessary." He was reaching for another stack of papers when his hand froze. Ava followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. There, partially visible beneath a pile of tax documents, was the corner of the manila envelope containing her new will. Tyler's eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment he understood what he was looking at. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, and finally, careful neutrality. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I think I found something that's probably private." Ava stared at the envelope, her mind racing. She could ask him to put it back, to pretend he hadn't seen it. She could maintain the secret she'd been carrying for weeks, continue living in the strange liminal space between her old life and her new reality. Instead, she heard herself saying, "You can look at it if you want to." Tyler's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He pulled out the envelope with careful reverence, as if handling something that might explode. When he opened it and began reading, Ava watched his face change, not with shock or hurt, but with something that looked like understanding. "You changed your will," he said finally. "It wasn't a question. I did. Because of your birthday. Because of how everyone treated you. Because of how everyone treats me. The birthday was just the final straw." Tyler set the documents down carefully and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "How long have you been feeling invisible?" The question hit her with unexpected force. "Years. Decades, maybe. I became so good at being the person everyone could count on that I forgot to be a person who mattered in her own right. And now? Now I'm trying to remember what it feels like to matter, to have my feelings and needs be important enough to influence my decisions." Tyler nodded slowly. "I notice you left me something significant. You've earned it. You're the only one who sees me as a person worth knowing, not just a resource to be tapped when convenient. What about the others? I mean, I understand why you're angry, but they're still family." Ava studied her grandson's face, seeing traces of David in his features but none of David's selfishness in his expression. "Tyler, do you think your father loves me?" "I think he loves the idea of you. I think he loves what you represent to him. Security, unconditional support, someone who will always be there to fix his problems. But do I think he loves you as a person? I'm not sure he knows you well enough to love you as a person." The assessment was both brutal and accurate. "And your aunts and uncle?" "Aunt Margaret loves you, but she shows it the way she shows everything. From a distance, through gestures that require money rather than time. Uncle Michael loves you, but he's convinced himself that geographical distance excuses emotional distance. Aunt Patricia loves you, but she's so overwhelmed by her own life that she can't see beyond her immediate needs." "And you think I'm being unfair?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the will documents. "I think you're being honest. Maybe brutally honest, but honest. And I think maybe that's what this family needs. A wake-up call about what love actually looks like." "Are you disappointed in me?" "Disappointed?" Tyler looked genuinely surprised. "Grandma, I'm proud of you. You spent 90 years putting everyone else first, and you finally decided to put yourself first. That takes incredible courage." Ava felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "You understand why I did it? I understand that you've been taken for granted by people who should have cherished you. I understand that you deserve better than to be treated like a convenience. And I understand that sometimes love means setting boundaries, even when those boundaries are uncomfortable. What do you think will happen when they find out?" Tyler's expression grew more serious. "Dad will be furious. He'll probably contest it, though I don't think he'll succeed. Aunt Margaret will be hurt, but will probably rationalize it as you being influenced by someone else. Uncle Michael will be disappointed but will accept it. Aunt Patricia..." He paused, thinking. "Aunt Patricia might actually learn something from this. She seemed different when she visited you in the hospital. And you? What will you do?" "I'll support you. Whatever happens, whoever gets angry, I'll support your decision. Because it's your decision to make, and you've earned the right to make it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Finally, Tyler spoke again. "Grandma, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. When this all comes out, and it will come out eventually." "Can I be here? Can I be the one standing beside you when you face them? Ava felt tears gathering in her eyes again. Tyler, you don't have to. I want to. You've been alone in this for too long. You shouldn't have to face their reactions alone. It might get ugly. Then I'll help you weather the storm. That's what family does, right? They show up when things get difficult, not just when things are convenient. As Tyler carefully replaced the documents in their envelope, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The certainty that she was not alone, that her decisions were understood and supported by someone who mattered to her. The secret was no longer hers alone, but somehow, that made her feel stronger rather than more vulnerable. Tyler's reaction had confirmed what she'd hoped, but hadn't dared believe, that her decision wasn't cruel or vindictive, but simply honest. Tyler, she said as he prepared to leave, you've given me something precious today. What's that? The knowledge that I raised at least one person who understands what love actually looks like. Tyler smiled, kissing her forehead gently. You raised more than one, Grandma. Some of us just needed longer to figure it out. As she watched him walk to his car, Ava felt the weight of her secret transform from burden to shared responsibility. Soon, the truth would emerge, and the family dynamics that had shaped her life for decades would be forever altered. But for now, she had Tyler's understanding, Rose's devotion, and Jim's companionship. She had people who saw her, valued her, and stood by her decisions even when those decisions were difficult. The reckoning was coming, but Ava Smith no longer feared it. She had allies now, and more importantly, she had the unshakable knowledge that she deserved better than she'd been getting. The woman who had spent 90 years being invisible was finally ready to be seen. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Tyler's discovery. Ava was in her kitchen, carefully spooning coffee into the filter with her good hand, when David's voice exploded through the phone with a fury she'd never heard before. Mom, we need to talk. Now. There was no greeting, no inquiry about her health, no pretense of civility, just raw anger that made the phone feel dangerous in her hand. Good morning, David, she said calmly, settling into her chair by the window. What's on your mind? Don't play games with me. I know what you did. I know about the will. Ava's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. How do you know about the will? Does it matter? What matters is that you've lost your mind if you think you can cut me out of what's rightfully mine. The words hit her like physical blows, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the depth of David's sense of entitlement. He wasn't calling to ask about her reasoning or to express hurt about their relationship. He was calling to assert ownership over her possessions. David, nothing is rightfully yours until I'm dead, and what I leave behind is my choice to make. Not when you're being manipulated by outsiders, not when you're clearly not thinking straight. Outsiders? You mean Rosa, who remembers my birthday and brings me soup when I'm sick? You mean Jim, who actually talks to me like I'm a person worth knowing? You mean Tyler, who visits because he enjoys my company? I mean the people who are obviously influencing you against your own family. Mom, think about what you're doing. I'm your son. Margaret, Patricia, Michael, we're your children. We're supposed to be your legacy. Ava felt something crystallize in her chest, hard and clear as ice. You are my legacy, David. The question is whether you're a legacy I'm proud of. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice carried a cold calculation that chilled her. I've already talked to a lawyer. You can't just cut your children out of your will because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. There are laws about this. There are ways to challenge these things. Then challenge it. But David, ask yourself this. When you're sitting in that lawyer's office, fighting for money from a woman who gave you everything for 48 years, what kind of person does that make you? It makes me someone who knows what family means. It makes me someone who won't let his mother be taken advantage of by strangers. Strangers? David, when was the last time you visited me without needing money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you remembered my birthday? I don't have to justify my relationship with you to anyone. You're my mother. That should be enough. It's not enough. Not anymore. The line went dead, and Ava stared at the phone. her hands surprisingly steady. She'd expected this conversation eventually, but David's immediate leap to legal threats, rather than emotional appeals, told her everything she needed to know about how he viewed their relationship. Her phone rang again within minutes. This time it was Margaret, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone managing a crisis. "Mom, I just got off the phone with David. He's very upset about some changes to your will. I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Margaret. I've restructured my will to better reflect my actual relationships." "Mom, that's a significant decision. Are you sure you've thought this through completely? Are you sure you're not acting out of temporary hurt feelings?" Ava felt a flicker of hope. Unlike David, Margaret seemed to be approaching this as a problem to be understood rather than a wrong to be corrected. "Margaret, when was the last time you visited me?" I was there a few weeks ago. Before your fall. For an hour. With your phone constantly ringing. Talking about reviewing my legal documents to make sure they served your interests properly." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Mom, I know I've been busy. The partnership track at the firm is incredibly demanding. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. I know you love me, sweetheart. But love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day about how you prioritize your time and attention. So you're punishing me for having a successful career? I'm rewarding the people who actually show up in my life. There's a difference." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Margaret alternating between genuine concern and barely concealed frustration. Unlike David, she didn't threaten legal action, but she also didn't seem to grasp that Ava's decision reflected anything deeper than temporary disappointment. Michael called from Seattle an hour later, his voice tired and resigned. "Mom, I talked to Margaret. She filled me in on the situation. What do you think about the situation?" "I think I haven't been the son I should have been. I think I've let geographical distance become emotional distance. And I think you have every right to leave your money to whoever you want to leave it to." The response surprised her. "You're not angry?" "I'm sad. I'm disappointed in myself. But angry? No, I'm a successful businessman, Mom. I don't need your money to survive. What I need is a relationship with you, and I realize I've been taking that for granted." "Michael, let me finish. I know I can't undo years of emotional absence with one phone call. But I want you to know that I understand why you made this decision. And I want to do better, regardless of what's in your will." Patricia's call came that afternoon, her voice thick with tears. "Mom, I don't understand. I know I've been overwhelmed, but I thought you knew I loved you. I thought you knew how much I appreciate everything you've done for us." "I know you love me, Patricia. But love without presence isn't enough anymore. What can I do? How can I fix this?" The question was different from what her siblings had asked. David had demanded his inheritance. Margaret had questioned her judgment. Michael had accepted responsibility. But Patricia was asking how to repair their relationship. "You can start by visiting me because you want to spend time with me, not because you need something. You can start by calling to ask how I'm doing, and actually listening to the answer. You can start by remembering that I'm a person with my own feelings and needs. I can do that. I will do that. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant to make you feel invisible." "I know you didn't, sweetheart. That's what makes this so painful. You're not malicious. You're just absent." By evening, Ava felt emotionally drained. The day had been a series of confrontations and revelations. Each conversation peeling back another layer of family dynamics she'd spent decades avoiding. Rosa arrived for her scheduled visit to find Ava sitting in her living room, surrounded by the debris of a day that had changed everything. "Señora Ava, you look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Rosa. Just processing some family drama." Rosa settled beside her on the couch, her presence immediately comforting. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ava found herself explaining the day's events, watching Rosa's face cycle through surprise, concern, and finally, a kind of sad understanding. "I'm so sorry, Señora. I know this must be difficult. The strange thing is, I feel more relieved than upset, like I've finally told the truth about something I've been lying about for years. What happens now? Now I wait to see which of my children are capable of change, and which ones are only interested in what they can get from me." Jim appeared at the door as if summoned, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of gentle concern. "I saw the cars coming and going all day. Everything okay?" "Family meeting," Ava said simply. "They know about the will." Jim settled into the chair across from her, his presence steady and reassuring. "How are you feeling about that? Like I've finally stopped pretending that being taken for granted is the same thing as being loved." Tyler arrived an hour later, his face grim with determination. "Dad called me. He's furious. He wants me to talk to you, to try to convince you to change your mind." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that I support your decision completely. I told him that if he wants to repair his relationship with you, he needs to start by looking at his own behavior instead of blaming everyone else." "How did he take that?" "About as well as you'd expect. He accused me of being manipulated by you, of being too young to understand family dynamics. I told him that maybe being young gives me a clearer perspective on what love actually looks like." As the four of them sat in Ava's living room, Rosa, Jim, Tyler, and herself, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt surrounded by people who saw her, valued her, and supported her decisions, even when those decisions were difficult. The reckoning had begun, and it would likely get messier before it resolved. But for the first time in decades, Ava Smith wasn't facing family drama alone. She had allies, advocates, and people who understood that her worth wasn't determined by her willingness to be taken for granted. The woman who had spent 90 years being invisible had finally found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. The first thing Ava noticed about her 91st birthday was the absence of anxiety. No careful preparation of unused china, no hopeful glances at a silent phone, no slow descent from anticipation to disappointment. Instead, she woke to the sound of laughter drifting from her kitchen. Rosa was already there, preparing breakfast with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged. Tyler sat at the table editing photos on his laptop, while Jim arranged fresh flowers from both their gardens in a simple mason jar. The scene felt organic, unforced, a gathering of people who chose to be there rather than felt obligated to appear. "Happy birthday, Grandma," Tyler said, looking up from his work. 91 years of being amazing." "Feliz cumpleaños, señora," Rosa added, setting a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs before her. "I made your favorite." The months since the revelation had settled into a new rhythm. David hadn't spoken to her since their final confrontation, and surprisingly, his absence brought peace rather than sadness. Margaret called weekly now, their conversations still somewhat stilted but gradually becoming more genuine. Michael had visited twice from Seattle, staying for entire weekends and actually talking about his life rather than just his work. But it was Patricia who had surprised everyone. Her daughter had embraced change with the determination of someone who'd recognized how close she'd come to losing something precious. She visited every Sunday now, bringing her teenagers who were slowly learning to appreciate their grandmother's stories. Last week, Patricia had simply sat with Ava for 2 hours. No agenda, no crisis, just the comfortable presence of two women who were finally learning to see each other. "Any regrets?" Jim asked, settling beside her with his own coffee. Their relationship had deepened into something that felt both familiar and thrilling. The comfortable intimacy of shared understanding mixed with the sweet surprise of late-blooming affection. "About the will? None. About taking so long to find my voice? Maybe a few." The doorbell rang and Tyler jumped up to answer it. He returned with Sarah Kim, who had become more friend than attorney over the past year. "I brought something," Sarah said, placing a small wrapped package on the table. "Consider it a birthday gift and a professional courtesy." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For your next chapter," Sarah explained. "Whatever that might be." Ava ran her fingers over the smooth cover, thinking about the woman who had sat in Sarah's office a year ago, uncertain and invisible. That woman had been replaced by someone who knew her worth, who surrounded herself with people who saw her value, who had learned that love required presence, not just promise. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the gift. As the afternoon sun slanted through her kitchen windows, Ava looked around at her chosen family. Rosa preparing cake, Jim reading the newspaper aloud, Tyler showing Sarah his latest photographs. This was what she'd wished for that night with 90 candles. To matter, to be seen, to stop being invisible. At 91, Ava Smith had finally learned the difference between being loved and being valued. The woman who had spent decades disappearing into other people's needs had discovered the radical power of insisting on her own worth. Her second act was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,